Okay, let's unpack this. Usually when a country changes its currency, that's pretty technical stuff. Dry, even. But what's happened with the Alliance of Sahel States? That's Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. It's different. Their plan to ditch the CFA franc, it's not just some financial tweak. It feels more like an act of revolution. The currency they use now, the CFA franc, a lot of people there see it as this kind of final, tangible link to colonial dependence. So these three nations planning their own money, a huge statement about sovereignty, but wow, it's also a massive economic gamble. So in this deep dive, we want to give you the shortcut to understanding what's really going on. We'll look at the history of the CFA franc, this mechanism of control some call neocolonial, and then we'll really dig into the three enormous challenges the AES is facing: stability, gold reserves, and the whole geopolitical mess they might be stepping into.
Yeah, and to really get why this is such a big deal, you kind of have to go back to the beginning. The CFA franc itself started way back in 1945. And that original name, Franc des colonies françaises d'Afrique. I mean, it says it right there, of the French colonies in Africa.
Literally colonial currency. And then, even after independence in the 60s, they kept the system, just polished the name a bit.
Exactly. A semantic facelift, as you said. It became Communauté Financière Africaine in West Africa, Coopération Financière en Afrique Centrale and Central Africa. But the core machinery, the thing critics still point to today, that sort of chain, it stayed pretty much the same.
Right. And that mechanism, the fixed link to the euro, that's really at the heart of the resentment now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why is that fixed rate, €1 to about 656 CFA francs, seen as so damaging?
Well, that fixed parity it's the crux of the problem for critics. It essentially takes away the most fundamental tools a government has to manage its own economy. Yes, the CFA franc is stable because it's pegged to the strong euro. But that stability, it feels artificial in, say, Bamako or Niamey. It means countries can't really control their own monetary policy.
So things like printing money for big infrastructure projects or adjusting the currency value.
Precisely. If you can't print money, you're often forced to look for foreign loans for major projects. And maybe even more critically, you can't devalue your currency. When your currency is artificially strong like that, your exports, maybe cotton, gold, livestock, they become more expensive for the rest of the world, less competitive. And at the same time, imports from Europe, everything from cars to processed food, they become relatively cheap. So it kind of structurally tilts the economy towards consuming foreign goods, not building up local industry.
And if you're feeling generous,
Please subscribe.
it helps us keep diving deep.
Thank you so much for that interjection.
Absolutely.
We want to make sure everyone listening knows how much that support means.
It's what keeps the show going and growing.
Okay, so it's a system that almost penalizes local production. Now, France did try some reforms, right, around 2019, 2020. What changed and why wasn't it enough?
Well, the biggest technical shifts were ending the requirement for these countries to deposit 50% of their foreign exchange reserves in the French treasury. That was a big symbolic thing. And France also pulled its representatives out of the governing bodies of the BCEAO, the West African Central Bank. So on paper, it looked like steps towards more autonomy.
But the anger didn't really go away.
No, because the fundamental link, the non-negotiable piece, remained. France is still the ultimate guarantor of the currency. If things went seriously wrong, the French treasury is implicitly or explicitly backing it up. And for critics, that means true economic sovereignty is still out of reach. Decisions are ultimately shaped by what works for the Eurozone, not necessarily what's needed in Ouagadougou.
And that underlying critique just exploded politically, didn't it? The sources really connect this push for monetary separation directly to the recent coup in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger. These new military governments came in on a wave of popular frustration about security, yes, but also this feeling of being dictated to by France. So the AES, this Alliance of Sahel States, it starts as a defense pact, but almost immediately pivots to demanding total sovereignty. And that inevitably includes money.
That's the crucial turn. Defense morphed into an economic liberation project, you could say, and they seem serious. Look at the timeline they've laid out. By November 2023, finance ministers were already meeting, mapping out economic integration.
Okay.
Then, fast forward to the Niamey Summit, July 2024, they announced plans for two key bodies: an investment bank, and importantly, a stabilization fund. The bank, the BCID-AES, that's meant to fund the kind of projects the CFA system made difficult.
And the stabilization fund that sounds like their attempt to build the safety net that the French guarantee used to provide?
Exactly. It's about building the institutional shock absorbers they didn't have before to handle currency swings or commodity price drops. Now, technically, the BCEAO hasn't received a formal request to leave yet, But all the signs point towards setting up the plumbing for a new currency, maybe aiming for an announcement around May 2025?
It's such a stark trade-off, isn't it? The promise is freedom, set your own interest rates, fund your own projects, control your destiny. But the price is giving up that guaranteed stability, that euro anchor. It's like stepping off a ledge, hoping you can fly.
It really is. And that brings us squarely to these, well, vertiginous challenges they face. Huge challenges. We can probably group them into three main areas. First, the most immediate internal danger, just keeping the new currency stable.
Right. If you cut that euro link, the markets are going to test you immediately. What stops the new currency from just plummeting?
Honestly, beyond political will and rhetoric, there's no built-in guarantee. The absolute nightmare scenario is a collapse in confidence leading to massive capital flight. If people inside and outside the country think the new currency won't hold value, they'll shift their money out fast. And we're talking digital transfers, instant, often straight back to European banks.
And that leads to
Runaway inflation, which is just devastating. For countries that import a lot of essentials, fuel, medicine, machinery, a rapid currency drop means the price of those necessities skyrockets. People's savings, their purchasing power, it just evaporates.
You hear comparisons, sometimes maybe too quickly, to places like Venezuela or Zimbabwe. Is that a fair parallel here?
It's tricky. You have to be careful with analogies. The AES countries aren't starting with the kind of massive sovereign debt some of those others had, but what they do lack, perhaps more acutely, is established institutional trust and political stability right now. So the risk might be less about long-term fiscal mismanagement and more about a sudden, sharp crisis of political confidence, which can actually be even faster, more brutal. They do have resources, which is a potential lifeline, but only if they can manage the politics.
Which leads right into the second big challenge.
If you find this deep dive interesting,
Or if you're learning something new,
we'd love for you to hit that like button.
and please share it with a friend.
It truly helps other people find
These complex yet crucial topics. Gold. You need something tangible to back a new currency, right? To give it weight, reassure people.
Absolutely. Central bank vaults need reserves. And here, there's actually a potential advantage. Mali and Burkina Faso are significant gold producers. Niger produces some too. So the plan seems to be dedicating a portion of mining revenue to build up a state-owned gold reserve.
Okay, but digging gold out of the ground is one thing. Using it effectively to back a currency sounds like a whole different ballgame, especially with, artisanal mining and complex supply chains in the region.
Exactly. It's a huge management challenge. This can't just be a promise on paper. It means actually getting the gold, securing it, refining it, storing it safely, often needing international partners for that. They have to figure out how to manage the fluctuating price of gold itself. Do peg directly to gold? Partially, it gets technically complex very fast.
And trust is paramount here.
Utterly. The absolute non-negotiable is transparency. They would need regular, public, verified reports. How much gold do we have? Where is it? What's its estimated value? Without that kind of rigorous openness, confidence just won't materialize. The currency risks being seen as, well, monopoly money.
So if the internal stability in the gold weren't enough, challenge number 3, the outside world. Geopolitics. Leaving the CFA Franc zone creates this kind of financial and political space, doesn't it? And nature, especially geopolitical nature, abhors a vacuum.
That's exactly right. This move puts the AES nations in uncharted territory and makes them potentially very interesting to other global powers, powers looking to gain influence, potentially at Europe's expense. You look at Russia, for instance. They already have military ties, security presence in Mali, Niger. They could step in with financial support, maybe deals structured outside the usual Western financial system to solidify those alliances.
And China, of course, already a massive economic player across Africa. What's their angle likely to be?
China's interests are typically resource-driven and infrastructure-focused. They could offer large loans, maybe tied to resource extraction, uranium from Niger, gold from Mali and Burkina Faso, or finance big infrastructure projects needed to get those resources out. It's about access and potentially creating debt dependencies.
So the big picture implication is Europe potentially loses significant influence in a region it's historically been dominant in. And the Sahel states might find themselves trading one form of dependency for another, potentially juggling competing interests from Russia, China, maybe others.
Yeah. That's the tightrope they have to walk. The whole point is sovereignty from France. But they need to be incredibly careful not to just swap one master for, well, potentially several new ones with their own demands.
So wrapping this up, what does this all mean for the millions of people actually living in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger? This is a declaration of independence, yes, but it sounds like an incredibly risky bet on the future for economies that really need stability.
Yeah, if we boil down everything we're seeing in the sources, you can sort of imagine three broad possible outcomes, three paths forward for you, the listener, to watch for. Path one, let's call it difficult but sovereign. They manage to launch the currency, they maintain control, but it struggles. Maybe slow devaluation, nagging inflation, difficulty attracting foreign investment. Living standards might stagnate or even dip, but they achieve the political goal of monetary autonomy. It's painful, maybe, but not a total collapse.
Okay, a tough road. What's the optimistic view? Because you mentioned the need for rigor in management.
Right, that's the core of path two, optimistic success. This requires exceptional discipline, really sound economic management from day one, plus maybe some strong support from new partners, perhaps Gulf states, maybe even other African powers. If, and it's a big if, they manage that, the currency could stabilize, gain credibility, maybe even start to fund real development. It could potentially become a kind of model for other African nations wanting out of similar systems, but it requires near-perfect execution in very difficult circumstances.
That sounds challenging given the current political climate in those countries.
It is extremely challenging.
We took a moment to remind everyone to like, subscribe, and share.
Because that support truly helps us keep bringing you these deep dives.
It's what allows us to keep unpacking these big global shifts.
Which brings us to the third scenario, the one everyone fears, catastrophe. Here, confidence just craters. Maybe there's a political shock, a mismanagement incident, capital flees en masse, hyperinflation takes hold. The economies basically seize up. It could trigger a humanitarian crisis and ultimately leave these nations far weaker, more unstable, and more vulnerable than they were, even within the constraints of the CFA franc.
Wow. So the world is definitely watching this unfold. It's a monumental gamble. And the question that hangs over it all, I suppose, is, in this push for true sovereignty, this necessary break from perceived neocolonial ties, are they inadvertently opening the door to new forms of dependence, new geopolitical pressures? That feels like the real tension here. A really complex balancing act for the Alliance of Sahel States.